Hello, and welcome to our midweek devotion. We are continuing in our Gospel Discipleship series on Sundays in worship, but then also with these midweek devotions, and we're going to be doing a series of interviews. We did one last week with the author of Gospel Discipleship, Pastor Michelle. This week, we're going to be interviewing Jill Hankins. And we are so pleased about that and glad you're with us. Let me just say a word about Jill coming on our staff. Jill came on our staff right as everything changed, right as we kind of threw out the rule books of what it meant to be a church and how we went about this to figure out new ways of doing things in response to a pandemic. And as a Matthean, I know that could have been a little frustrating. And when I use the word Matthean, that's a part of our gospel discipleship language of Mattheans, Markans, Lucans, Johannines, helping individuals and congregations figure out something about their discipleship style and how they can relate to others better. If you haven't taken the assessment for that, that is possible for you to do as well. So Jill did come to us in the midst of the beginning of a pandemic, and we started doing church in a very, very different way. But before we get into all of that, Jill, as one of our newest staff members, I'd like for you just to share a little bit about who you are to the congregation, how long you've been a part of the congregation, a little bit about your educational background and vocational background.
Sure.
Yeah.
I came to this church about 30 years ago. So I've been here a while.
Uh-huh.
But I've been a Methodist since I can remember.
Okay.
My mother joined a staff as the full-time organist at a church in Texas, a large metropolitan church, when I was, I think, 18 months old.
Okay.
So it's ingrained. I went to Hendricks, thought that I might be a youth pastor while I was there, and things change. Yeah. And I didn't. But that's okay. I mean, God had other plans for me. Those were kind of my plans. But anyway, most recently I actually worked at Hendricks, and my job there was very much suited for a Matthean. It was in residence life. It was all organization and administration and ticking lots of boxes. But I also got to unofficially counsel some kids, which was wonderful. Most of I guess where my heart is solving puzzles. I don't like jigsaw puzzles because they give me a headache, but I think that's mostly my eyesight. But I love looking at a problem and trying to figure out how can I solve this that will please the most people and upset the least amount of people. So that's really I think one of my true gifts. And I had to actually learn to be organized in that job. It evolved over time into massive organization. And now I'm here, and everything fell apart.
And your job was to help us be organized
Yeah.
and fall into the pattern that we had been well established, and now we're figuring out how to do that in a new way.
Yeah, but that's okay.
So,
it's a puzzle.
Sure, and thank you for that. Thank you for that spirit. So church has been a part of your life.
Oh,
your,
yes.
Mom was a part of a church staff. Now you're a part of a church staff. Hendricks College, involved in the church, thinking about being a youth director. Worked in the district office for a while.
I did.
So it is interesting, and Pastor Michelle can share a little bit more about this maybe later, that the word church is used in the Gospel of Matthew, and it's the only gospel where this word is used. So this gospel is kind of a rule book for the church.
Yeah.
Jesus telling us what we need to be doing. That's a part of your identity.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah.
It is.
You've really been formed around that reality.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, that's great.
I think the Holy Spirit moves in all sorts of ways, but for me anyway, without knowing how to live, that doesn't really mean a lot to me. I have to have that rule book.
It's interesting. I've been sitting here listening to you. This is one of the hazards of being the author of this book is that I listen to people's language and how they describe their life and how they describe their journey, and I hear little tick words that are signals for me. And I certainly heard a ton of Matthean words. Talking about the organization piece, talking about there being a plan, talking about that being in place. I actually heard a fair amount of Lucan language from you, and I think that is largely because the churches that you've been formed in have probably been Lucan churches. So when you describe church, you describe it in terms of a Lucan identity, but with a Matthean approach within that identity. Does that make sense?
If I knew more about Lucans, yes.
So Lucans are
sure.
Lucans are very relational. And, you talked in terms of like your counseling piece that you said. But now the counseling piece, that's an interesting one. That's where I think your secondary gift's coming in. Because and that's the Markan piece. That I think your secondary gift, and you said you described in terms of that's one of my gifts. And Markans think in terms of giftedness and in empowering people in their own life. So that's where I see that. But
I see.
So it's just interesting to hear the interplay of all of that working together in the way that you're using the language to describe it. I would like us to reflect a little bit on how you see those two gifts coming out in your life. So how do you see your Matthean really exhibiting, and how do you see your Markan, and how do those work together, or how are they challenging together?
Okay, do you want this as in my faith, or my work in the church, or my personal relationships?
I mean, honestly, discipleship should be all of those things,
Yeah.
right? Discipleship
It
is how we are living our lives.
Okay.
So you can reflect really in any of those spaces you would like to reflect in.
Okay. Well, as far as Mattheans go, I am the planner. When I get up on a Saturday morning, I want to know what we're going to do that day. I don't want to wait until Sunday night and go, oh my gosh, we could have done X, Y, Z. And it drives me nuts to not have a plan. That's not relaxing for me. If the plan is to lay on the sofa all day and binge watch something, then I don't mind doing nothing all day. But I want it to be planned, because otherwise I feel like I'm missing something. At church, it's kind of the same way. I like knowing, well, I'm in the choir. So I like knowing what's coming up. Do I need to get up and really warm up before I get to choir on Sunday morning, or can I kind of take it a little bit easier? I guess on the flip side, several years ago in a worship committee meeting, you asked me to make a banner, or maybe I volunteered, maybe I got voluntold. I don't remember, but I made a banner, and I loved it. And so I've started doing that, and most of what I do is, it sounds like I've made hundreds and I haven't at all, but is I'll go through like Pinterest and find a picture of something I really like, and I look at that end product and I kind of reverse engineer it to figure out how is that put together, what materials do I need, how much do I need, yada, 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 and then kind of make it my own.
Right.
And I love that, and I think that speaks to my Markan, but it also speaks to the Matthean, because
really
you
does.
have to have a plan to get it on the banner and have it look right.
Right.
Yeah. And you said voluntold. I can tell you volunteered.
Okay.
I've heard in worship planning meetings, in just
I'm
other
sure I
meetings in the
did.
church, I have heard you say several times, you get
I'll do
inspired
that.
and you say, I can do that.
I'll do that.
I'll try that.
Yeah.
I have heard that several times. And the banner led to Stoles.
Oh, yeah.
And, and it was much more than a banner. It was a whole altar design
Right?
for Advent
yeah.
that year. Well, at least that's the one I'm thinking about. There have been others as well.
There have been others,
There
yeah.
have been many others as well. So you volunteered because you want to be active. You want to be in the church.
I do. I do.
think sometimes Methians can over-volunteer. Is
Yes.
that right?
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Wade
I think
tells me to stop raising my hand. Just stop.
But I get a sense that you have some clarity of where your giftedness will lie pretty quickly. You might try a lot of things, but I get the sense that you, at least in the interactions that I've had with you have a sense of, I'm probably not the right person for that particular thing. And that's a good Matthean Markan blend. That's a willingness to try, but also a willingness to recognize that wasn't me. That
Right.
wasn't me. Right, and I love the way you're describing the work with the banners. I was cracking up a little bit. Like that is also a very Matthean Markan description, right? Because you were like, oh, I see this. I get inspired by this design. Then I reverse engineer it, right?
Yeah.
Like, okay, we got to unpack what the plan was to get there. So I'm going backwards in the plan so that I can move forward in the plan. But then you said, so I can make it my own.
Yeah.
Right, like
Yeah.
it'll have its own creative space,
Uh-huh.
but I'm gonna have a plan for how that creativity unfolds, and that can be a very strong pairing in that sense, because you'll have the inspiration and then it will actually come to be, right? So
I do that in my quilting too.
Okay.
I have yet to make a quilt by pattern. It just doesn't happen.
Now, see, isn't that interesting? Because pattern would be so Matthean.
Yeah, but it looks like everybody else's.
Because you've got that kind of innate planning reality, but that Markan creative side to you.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what I've been impressed with, just in your altar arts in general.
Oh.
Interactions that I've had primarily with you have been around because we have to set up filming, and so first of all, you want to know our filming schedule, which I'm like, dude, I'm Markan. Right?
But you're secondary Matthean, aren't you?
No.
Oh, I thought you were.
Johannine.
I'm sorry.
Secondary Johannine. I got almost no Matthean in me. So.
Well, we'll work on that.
And so I have tried to meet you in that space and say, okay, usually Thursday. You can count on usually Thursday. So I can give you that sense. But I've loved working with you on conceiving of those ideas, of talking through what will work, particularly around gospel discipleship, because you wanted to.
That was hard.
Sense, but it came together like that. I mean, the visioning, the idea. We basically sat down and had a 30-second conversation, which was stunning. And I think it's because you came in already with an idea, and we collaborated really quickly on that to come to the space. But I love that I see so much creativity in the banners, in the altar arts, all of that. A lot of that's driven by you, but it also actually happens.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things for me about worship is the Matthean in me likes a order of service.
Yep.
And honestly, if I had my druthers, I would go to high church. High church. That's okay.
Yep.
I like all the symbolism. I love, obviously, the order of things. But sometimes, some people don't understand a lot of that symbolism. They're not familiar with it, especially visitors. And if we can connect to people through the visual arts or through the music, and maybe not the other things that are going on in the service, all the better. For me, it has to have both.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know what else to say.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. That's one thing I love about this system, because it helps us to certainly understand what our preferences and our styles when it comes to things like worship, but then also helps us to understand others as well. As a pastor, I hear it all the time. I mean, from people who say, I like traditional worship, high church. I want to be immersed in the history of the church and be rooted in that way. That's spiritually uplifting. And then the next person will come along and say, but all that just stifles the Spirit. I want the Spirit just to move. We need to.
But it can move in that situation.
Of course it can. Of course it can. So yeah, there's truth in both. It's one reason why we try to accommodate that and offer that. But then also offer a blend in both, so that even in our contemporary service, we have creeds and prayers and some consistency in the order, because getting out of that balance can be spiritually damaging. Jill, thank you for this conversation and for answering some of these questions. And I promise you, we are going to get the rules kind of back in place and get the system in place at some point. And to the congregation, I'll say it may not look like it did before. We are moving into certainly a new season in the way we do ministry, in the way we do, and in the way we practice our faith. Michelle, thank you for Gospel Discipleship.
Sure.
And this is such a tool to help us navigate that new path, that encompasses multiple ways of being a disciple. The more we can kind of get into that, I think the more faithful we'll be, and the more fruitful we will be. Thank you for being with us for this midweek devotion. Please join us as we worship together. Join us for these other midweek devotions, and may you grow as a disciple of Jesus Christ.